What happens when the man who signs the checks picks up a mop and no one knows who he is? Brandon Voss leaned against the doorframe of his office, watching the rain drizzle down the glass. 13 hotels across 3 states, each one a piece of what he'd built over the last 12 years. He'd bought the company from a retiring couple who ran it like a family business. Somewhere along the way, though, it stopped feeling like family. Complaints weren't flooding in, but something felt off. Numbers didn't lie. Turnover in housekeeping had quietly doubled in the last year. Guest satisfaction dipped. And yet, the district manager's reports all said things were fine. He didn't trust fine. Brandon had met only the top brass at each location. Housekeepers, front desk staff, maintenance. He knew their names from payroll, but not their faces. That was about to change. He called in his assistant and laid out his plan. He'd go undercover as a trainee housekeeper in the 10th location Elk Ridge Inn, a mid-size hotel in upstate New York. The staff had never seen him. Most probably thought the owner was some corporate ghost in another state. He'd grow out some stubble, wore thick-rimmed glasses, dyed his hair darker, and walked with a slight slouch. He looked nothing like the suited man in the corporate newsletters. A week later, Brian, the new housekeeping trainee, walked into Elk Ridge Inn with a duffel bag and a practiced nervous smile. "This the front desk?" Brandon asked, setting his bag down. The woman behind the counter barely looked up. "You here for the training?" "Yeah." She motioned toward a narrow hallway. "Through there. Housekeeping office. Ask for Natalie." Brandon made his way back, where he was greeted by a woman in her late 40s with a sharp ponytail and tired eyes. "You're Brian?" she asked. "That's me." "All right, you'll be shadowing Tanya today. Grab a cart." Tanya was already loading up supplies. She was in her early 30s, sleeves rolled, fingers moving fast. She glanced at him once. "New guy." "Yup. Keep up. Don't touch guest belongings, and if you find anything weird, call me." "Let's go." They cleaned room after room. Tanya didn't talk much unless she had to, but Brandon noticed things. There was no consistent system. Supplies were low. Sheets were worn. Tanya had to run back and forth between floors because the carts weren't stocked right. And yet, she never slowed down. By noon, sweat was dripping down his back. Tanya handed him a bottle of water without saying a word. He took it and nodded thanks. In room 212, while scrubbing a bathroom, Brandon heard a voice outside. "Where the hell is Tanya?" A man's voice, loud. Tanya stepped out. "Just finishing 212. "You're behind," the man barked. Again. Brandon peeked out. A short, stocky man in a wrinkled polo stood with arms crossed. "I had to run towels to 409. Again. Because the laundry team's short." "That's not my problem. Make it up. I'm not covering for your slowness." Tanya didn't respond. She just turned back toward the room. "Who's the new guy?" the man asked, eyeing Brandon. "Brian. Training." The man snorted. "Well, don't teach him your pace." Brandon kept his head down. Tanya's jaw was tight. She didn't say a word the rest of the shift. At the end of the day, Brandon followed her back to the service area. She collapsed onto a crate near the supply shelves, rubbing her temples. He hesitated. "You all right?" She looked up, startled. "Yeah, just tired." "Who was that guy?" "Manager. Vince. He's always like that." Brandon nodded slowly. "How long you been here?" 6 years. I was full-time until last year. Now I'm part-time because they cut hours. But I still work like it's full-time." Brandon leaned against the wall. "Why not leave?" She laughed. Bitter. "Single mom. No degree. Benefits here suck. But I've got a kid. Can't risk no job." He didn't push further. The next day, Brandon arrived early. Tanya was already there. No coffee, no small talk. just work. Around 10, they took a short break on the loading dock. Tanya sat on an overturned bucket, staring at her phone. You got family? Brandon asked. Yeah, my son. He's 7. He live with you? Yeah, since his dad took off. Brandon looked at her, then down. That's hard. She shrugged. He's the only reason I keep going. Then, as if something cracked inside her, she exhaled sharply and put the phone down. You want to know what really broke me? She said, voice shaking. Last month. My uncle died. Raised me like a dad. I asked for one day, just one, to go to his funeral. Vince said no. Said we were too short-staffed. Said if I didn't show, don't bother coming back. Brandon froze. I didn't go, she whispered. My son kept asking why we weren't at the church. I told him work needed me. That's when I knew I didn't matter here. Not to them. She covered her face, tears silently falling between her fingers. Brandon sat next to her. He didn't speak. He couldn't. Not yet. But inside, something was shifting. And it wasn't going back. 2 days into his undercover stint, Brandon was already running low on patience and excuses. Every part of Elk Ridge Inn's back of house felt like it had been stretched to its limit, then left that way. He wasn't just seeing stress, he was carrying it. Literally. Broken vacuum cords. Rusted utility carts with one wobbly wheel. Cleaning rags so worn they left more lint than they picked up. It was like no one upstairs even knew or cared. He'd started asking quiet questions during room turnovers, trying not to draw attention. Most responses were short, guarded. But everyone had one thing in common. They were exhausted. Not the kind of tired you shake off after a bad night's sleep. The kind that settles behind your eyes, no matter how much coffee you drink. When Brandon showed up that morning, Tanya didn't greet him. She was standing outside the break room, arms folded, staring at a laminated sheet taped to the wall. What's up? He asked, dropping his backpack near the lockers. She didn't look over. They changed the schedule again. Brandon stepped closer. There were red circles drawn on the staff roster with a ballpoint pen. Tanya's name was listed for 6 consecutive days again. Didn't you work 5 straight already? Yeah. Did you agree to this? No, a voice from behind them cut in. If you don't like the schedule, you can talk to Vince, assuming you can find him. The speaker was a woman in her early 20s, wearing a hotel polo shirt 2 sizes too big and a name tag that read, Lily. Her tone wasn't confrontational, just flat. Tanya sighed. You covering 2 floors again today? 3. Dora called out. Again. Brandon followed them out to the service elevator. Lily glanced sideways at him. You're the new guy, right? He nodded. Don't get too comfortable. Brandon didn't respond. The elevator groaned its way up to the 3rd floor and spat them out into the hallway. The air smelled faintly of bleach and something burnt. Lily peeled off toward her floor. Tanya pushed her cart silently toward room 308. They cleaned in silence for a while. Then Tanya turned toward him, eyes narrowing. Why are you really here? He froze mid-fold. What do you mean? You don't clean like someone who's done this before. But you listen like someone who's not just here to learn. Brandon smiled faintly. Just trying to do the job. She didn't push further, but her suspicion lingered. Later that afternoon, they were called down to the lobby. A busload of guests had arrived early, and the rooms weren't ready. Vince was pacing near the front desk, barking into his phone. Brandon could hear his voice even from across the lobby. I don't care if the linens aren't sorted, just get the rooms cleared. He hung up and turned toward them. I need 4 doubles turned over in 15 minutes. Now. Tanya blinked. That's not possible. You want hours next week? Brandon stepped forward. We're already maxed. We can't do 4 in 15 without skipping steps. Vince stepped closer. Did I ask for excuses? Brandon's jaw tightened. This isn't safe. Or clean. Vince's eyes narrowed. You want to talk safety? You're a trainee. You don't have a say. Brandon didn't respond. He turned and followed Tanya toward the stairwell. Her hands were shaking as she wheeled the cart forward. I've never seen them care less, she whispered. They worked in silence. Cutting corners they hated cutting, no dusting, no under-bed checks, no time for double sheeting. Brandon made a mental note of every compromise. The breaking point came that evening. They were finishing up the last of the early check-ins when they heard raised voices from the laundry bay. Tanya glanced at him, then walked quickly toward the noise. Brandon followed. Inside, Lily was arguing with a man twice her age. He was pointing at a pile of unfolded sheets. You think this is good enough? I told you the folding machine jammed. I called maintenance. You think I care? You think guests care? I'm not the one who signed off on the broken machine. The man stepped forward. Too close. Brandon moved between them. Back up. The man stared at him. Who the hell are you? Doesn't matter. Step back. Vince appeared in the doorway seconds later. What's going on here? Brandon turned. This guy's threatening staff. He's head laundry. He's allowed to give direction. Brandon took a slow breath. There's a difference between direction and intimidation. Lily was visibly shaken. Her hands were balled into fists at her side, but her voice was steady. He got in my face because the machine jammed again. I already filed 3 reports. No one's done anything. Vince looked at her, then at the older man. Just cool off. Both of you. Brandon's voice dropped. That's not enough. Vince looked at him like he was a fly buzzing around a plate. You're a trainee. Stay in your lane. Brandon turned to Lily. You okay? She nodded once. I'll finish my shift. Brandon made a decision right then. He didn't care if it blew his cover. I need to speak to all staff in the break room. Now. Vince frowned. You don't get to, I said now. Something in his voice made even Vince pause. 10 minutes later, the break room was packed. Tanya, Lily, the head laundry guy, 2 maintenance techs, even the front desk clerk all watching him. Brandon stepped to the front. My name's not Brian. He pulled off his glasses, let the silence stretch. My name's Brandon Voss. I own this hotel, and 12 others like it. No one moved. I came here because something didn't feel right. I needed to see for myself. What I've seen is unacceptable. He turned toward Lily. You reported a broken machine 3 times. Nothing happened. Today you were cornered by a coworker. There will be consequences. He looked to the older man. You're done here. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out. The man's face flushed. What, you heard me? You don't intimidate people in my building. He turned back to the group. Vince. The manager straightened, face pale. You ignored safety. You threatened hours to force speed. You dismissed harassment. You're fired. Vince opened his mouth, but Brandon cut him off. I'm not taking questions. He scanned the room. Most of you have been working under pressure that no one should tolerate. Broken equipment, understaffing, no support. That ends today. He turned to Tanya. I heard what happened with your uncle. I'm ashamed I didn't know. From now on, emergency leave is protected. No exceptions. Tanya didn't speak. Her eyes were locked on the floor. Brandon continued. Tomorrow, there'll be temp staff arriving to support housekeeping and laundry. Every broken machine will be inspected and fixed. We're bringing in a new manager, someone from inside this staff, not outside. He paused, looking around. For too long, this hotel ran on fear and shortcuts. That's not leadership. That's failure. He stepped back, letting the weight of it settle. No applause, no cheers, just quiet. but it was the kind of quiet that meant people were listening. And for the first time in a long time, they had a reason to. The next morning started without the usual dull shuffle of carts and half-hearted greetings. Nobody spoke much, but the silence felt different now, sharper, expectant. Tanya stood near the staff lockers, tying her apron with slow, deliberate movements. When Brandon entered the break room, no one looked away. They didn't know what to expect now that Brian was gone, and the real owner was standing in his place. He took a clipboard from the counter and glanced around the room. "Today's schedule is going to look a little different," he said. "We've got 2 temp workers arriving at 10. Until then, we'll split the floors with half loads. No one takes more than 5 rooms at a time. Laundry is being rerouted to the central facility until repairs are finished. Front desk will hold check-ins until 3. Nobody nodded, but nobody left either. Questions? A young man near the lockers raised a hand slowly. His badge read Marcos. His uniform looked a size too small across the shoulders. "What happens when the temps leave?" "We're still short." Brandon nodded. "We're interviewing for 3 full-time roles this week. You'll have input on who gets hired." Marcos looked surprised, but said nothing more. "All right, let's get started." Instead of standing back, Brandon grabbed a fresh housekeeping apron and stepped into the hallway with Tanya. She didn't say anything until they were inside the stairwell. "You really plan to work the floor again?" He adjusted the strap across his shoulder. "Not planning on watching from a distance anymore." The first room they entered hadn't been touched since the previous evening. The guest had left behind a tipped-over trash can, half-eaten takeout, and a clogged sink. Tanya handed him gloves. "Been meaning to ask. What made you come here? This hotel?" "Not one of the others." Brandon started stripping the bed. The numbers were off, but not in a way I could explain on paper. Guest complaints were vague. Staff turnover spiked. It just didn't feel right. She handed him fresh pillowcases. "You were right." They worked in rhythm, saying little. It wasn't until the third room when Tanya broke the silence again. "Did you mean it? About inside hires?" "Every word." She hesitated. "Then you should look at Lily. She trained half the temps last summer without being asked. She's young, but she gets things done." Brandon nodded. "I noticed." They continued down the hallway. At 10 sharp, 2 temp workers arrived, both in gray polos with a third-party staffing logo. Marcos led them through the back corridor while Lily gave them a quick tour of the supply room, pointing out which carts were still missing parts. By noon, Brandon was in the staff kitchen, rinsing his face and drinking from a paper cup when Lily stepped in behind him. "I heard what you said about internal hires," she said, wiping her hands on a towel. "If that's real, I want to apply." He turned to face her. "Tell me why." "I've been here 2 years. I know the system inside out. I've trained new hires. I've stayed late to cover floors when people quit. I'm not perfect, but I care more than most." She blinked, then added, "And I'm tired of being ignored." He studied her for a moment. "What's the first thing you'd fix?" She didn't hesitate. "The way we onboard people. No one gets proper training. They're thrown into chaos and sink or swim. It's not fair. Or safe." He gestured toward the hallway. "Walk with me." As they made their way back toward the loading dock, Brandon noticed one of the temps standing off to the side, staring into a utility closet. The cart next to him was untouched. "You all right?" Brandon asked. The man mid-30s, clean-shaven, with a hotel-issued badge that read Derek, looked startled. "Yeah, sorry. This place is rough." Brandon stepped closer. "Need help with something?" Derek scratched the back of his neck. "Honestly, I didn't sign up for this. Nobody said we'd be cleaning rooms this far gone. I've done commercial cleaning, but not like this." Brandon nodded. "We're working on stabilizing things. I won't force you to stay. Derek exhaled slowly. I'll finish the shift. But I won't come back tomorrow. Understood. As he turned to leave, Brandon caught a glimpse of a maintenance tech tall, older, with a limp struggling to lift a floor buffer into the supply closet. No one was helping. Need a hand? Brandon asked. The man looked up, surprised. Yeah, thanks. They lifted the machine together. Name's Paul, the man said. Been here since the place opened. Brandon wiped his hands. Appreciate the years. Paul shrugged. Well, not many left. I'm retiring next spring. But I'd like to see things get better before I go. Brandon leaned against the doorframe. What's the worst part of your day? Paul chuckled. The list is long. But honestly, the radio silence. We report problems, they vanish into some void. Last winter, I filed a dozen repair tickets for a heating unit. Nobody came till March. Brandon's expression hardened. That's changing. As the day wound down, Brandon called Tanya to the office. She stepped in cautiously, wiping her hands on her apron. I want to ask something, he said. Would you consider leading housekeeping until we find a long-term manager? She stared at him. Me? You already do most of the coordination. Staff trust you. I'll support you directly. She hesitated. I'm not management. You don't need a title to lead. But I can give you one now. She looked down at her shoes. What about pay? 15% bump immediately. Plus a bonus tied to department stability over the next 3 months. She didn't answer right away. I'll think about it. Fair. That evening, as Brandon walked past the front desk, he noticed a guest arguing with the clerk. The guest, red-faced and impatient, was waving a printed reservation. I paid for a deluxe king. This is a standard room. The clerk, a young man in his 20s, was flipping through the check-in ledger. I understand, sir, but we're full tonight. This is the room that was available. I don't care what's available. I want what I paid for. Brandon stepped in. Is there a problem? The guest turned. Who are you? I'm the owner. Let's sort this out. The clerk looked visibly relieved. Brandon turned to him. What happened? The clerk handed over the ledger. Looks like the deluxe rooms were overbooked by the third-party vendor. We only got the update this morning. Brandon turned back to the guest. I apologize for the confusion. I'll refund the difference and offer a free breakfast for the inconvenience. The man grumbled but nodded. As the guest walked away, the clerk exhaled. Thanks. I didn't know what else to do. Brandon nodded. You handled it well. Next time, flag me earlier. The clerk looked surprised. You're really going to be around? I will now. That night, after most of the staff had clocked out, Brandon sat alone in the break room staring at the roster. Every name was a person who had survived disrepair, poor leadership, and silence. That was going to change. Not from a memo, but from being there. He wrote 3 notes by hand. One to Lily, offering her a department coordinator trial role. One to Tanya, outlining her new responsibilities. And one to the corporate office, requesting that all staff at Elk Ridge receive retroactive hazard pay for the past 4 weeks. He folded them, placed them in envelopes, and left them on the counter. Then he turned off the light and walked out into the quiet hallway, where the hum of vending machines was the only sound. Tomorrow, things would not be perfect, but they would be honest. And that was a start. Brandon stepped into the Elk Ridge Inn conference room just after sunrise. The blinds were still closed, and the air smelled faintly of old carpet and burnt coffee. A few folding chairs were scattered around the long table, and the dry erase board still had last month's out-of-order housekeeping checklist written in a faded scrawl. He didn't touch it. Instead, he opened his laptop and waited. By 7:30, Tanya arrived, her uniform pressed, eyes alert. She paused in the doorway, then walked in and took the seat beside him without a word. Lily followed soon after, clutching a notepad and chewing the inside of her cheek. Marcos came in behind her, nodding quietly before sitting down. Brandon looked up. "Thanks for coming in early. We'll keep it short." He turned the laptop so they could see the screen. "This is the new staffing model. We're capping maximum rooms per housekeeper at 7 per shift. Anything above that triggers backup from temp support." Marcos leaned forward. "Even when we're short, we'll prioritize safety over speed. If guests wait, they wait. We're not risking health to meet unrealistic deadlines." Tanya scratched her temple. "What about deep cleans? We get those last minute sometimes. We'll schedule them 3 days in advance. Emergency requests go through you." He turned to her. "You're officially interim housekeeping lead. You'll report directly to me." She blinked, then nodded once, slowly. Brandon continued, "Lily, your new title is Operations Coordinator. You'll split time between front desk and facilities. You'll also manage onboarding and retention for new hires." Lily looked up. "Onboarding? You'll lead it. I want a structured program. Manuals, shadow shifts, checklists. You design it. Build what you wish you'd had." She stared for a second, then scribbled something in her notebook. Brandon leaned back. "I'll be here 2 days a week for the next 3 months. I won't interfere with day-to-day unless something slips. If you need something that isn't being addressed, come straight to me." Marcos shifted in his seat. "What if someone higher up blocks a request?" Brandon's tone didn't change. "No one outranks me." They sat in silence a moment before Tanya asked, "What about pay?" "We're implementing a retention bonus for all hourly staff who've been here more than 12 months. It'll show up on the next paycheck." No one said anything, but Lily's pen stopped moving. Brandon stood. "Let's get to work." They filed out without ceremony, passing the first wave of guests checking out. Brandon headed straight for the laundry room, where the repair team had finally arrived. 2 men in gray uniforms were pulling apart the folding machine while Paul stood nearby, arms crossed. "Morning," Brandon said. Paul nodded. "They say it'll take 2 days. Whatever it takes. We're rerouting laundry until then." Brandon turned to leave but paused. "You ever consider mentoring an apprentice?" Paul raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because you're retiring soon, and I'd rather keep your knowledge in the building." Paul tilted his head. "You find someone willing to learn. I'll teach them." Brandon extended a hand. "Deal." He left the laundry bay and headed upstairs, where the hallway smelled of lemon cleaner and fresh linen. Tanya was inspecting a cart at the end of the corridor, while Lily walked a new hire through towel folding steps. Neither looked up as he passed. He didn't interrupt. At noon, he stepped outside to take a call from the HR director at corporate. "We've processed the hazard pay," the director confirmed. "Should hit accounts by Friday." "Good," Brandon said. "And the grievance review?" "Completed." Vince's record had multiple complaints. They were never forwarded. "Why?" "Regional manager suppressed them. We're investigating." "Start drafting his termination." Brandon hung up and looked across the parking lot. A woman in her 60s was standing by a car, struggling with a suitcase. He crossed the lot quickly. "Need a hand?" She turned, startled. "Oh, thank you. My arm's not what it used to be." He lifted the suitcase into the trunk and closed it gently. "Your stay all right?" It was clean, quiet. Staff seemed focused. He nodded. "That's the goal." She smiled faintly. "You run this place?" "In a way." She got in the car and drove off. Inside, Lily was at the front desk, typing quickly. The phone rang. She answered on the second ring. "Yes, hello? This is Elk Ridge Inn. How can I help you?" Brandon waited until she finished. Who's covering your break? I'll take mine when Tanya gets back down. He glanced at the clock. Go now. I'll cover. She hesitated, then stepped aside. Thanks. He slid behind the desk. The screen had 5 open reservations and 2 flagged messages. He clicked through them, scanning details. A guest had requested hypoallergenic pillows. Another asked for a late checkout. He logged both and flagged them for Tanya. 15 minutes later, Lily returned with a sandwich in hand. Anything urgent? Nothing you can't handle. She took her seat, then paused. I'm not used to being asked what I think. You'd better get used to it. That afternoon, Brandon joined the maintenance walkthrough. Paul led the route, pointing out faulty thermostats, cracked tiles, and a slow drain in the east stairwell. Brandon took notes. At the end of the shift, he gathered the team in the break room. No speeches this time, just a clipboard. This is a survey, he said. Anonymous. 3 questions. What's working, what's not, and what would make you stay longer. Drop it in the locked box by the time clock. Tanya looked at him. You really want to read all that? Yes. Even the angry ones? Especially those. People took the clipboards without saying much. But they wrote. By 5, the building felt different. Not lighter, no one was celebrating, but steadier. People moved with purpose, and fewer eyes were on the floor. As Brandon gathered his things, Paul passed by, holding a small toolbox. You weren't what I expected. What did you expect? Someone who'd talk a lot and fix nothing. Brandon gave a quiet laugh. I've seen enough talking. You planning to do this at the other properties? One at a time. Paul nodded. Start with the ones where no one complains. That's where the trouble hides. Brandon watched him disappear into the stairwell. Outside, the sun was low behind the hills. He got into his car, started the engine, and sat still for a moment. The building behind him didn't look any different. Same cracked sidewalk, same flickering porch light, but inside people were being heard. And that was the first real renovation.